When you think of war, you probably imagine tanks, missiles, and soldiers on the ground. But in the 21st century, some of the most devastating weapons never make a sound. They don't explode, they don't leave craters, but they can bring entire nations to their knees. I'm talking about economic sanctions, and they've been the weapon of choice for modern superpowers. Today, we're diving deep into how sanctions have transformed from diplomatic slaps on the wrist into full scale economic warfare. And trust me, the implications are bigger than you think. Let's put this in perspective. Right now, the United States alone has active sanctions on more than 20 countries and thousands of individuals and companies. We're talking about Russia, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Syria, Cuba. The list goes on. And here's the crazy part. These sanctions affect roughly one-third of the world's population. That's over 2 billion people living under some form of economic restriction imposed by foreign governments. But when did a diplomatic tool become a weapon? And more importantly, why are sanctions now the go-to option instead of traditional military action? First, let's break down what sanctions actually are. In simple terms, economic sanctions are penalties imposed by one country or a group of countries to pressure another nation into changing its behavior. Think of them as the international equivalent of grounding a teenager, except instead of taking away their phone, you're freezing billions of dollars and cutting off access to global markets. Sanctions come in different trade sanctions, blocking imports and exports of certain goods, financial sanctions, freezing assets, blocking bank transactions, or cutting countries off from international payment systems like SWIFT. So how did we get here? Sanctions aren't new. They've been around for centuries, but their use has exploded in the modern era. During the Cold War, sanctions were relatively rare and mostly symbolic. The real deterrent was military power and nuclear weapons. But in the 1990s, something changed. After the Gulf War, the UN imposed comprehensive sanctions on Iraq. The goal was to force Saddam Hussein to comply with weapons inspections without another war. Here's the problem. Those sanctions devastated ordinary Iraqis. Estimates suggest hundreds of thousands of children died due to malnutrition and lack of medical supplies. The regime, it stayed in power and actually consolidated control. This is when policymakers realized they needed smarter sanctions, ones that could hurt governments without starving populations. Fast forward to today, the combination of globalization and technology has made sanctions exponentially more powerful. Why? Because modern economies are interconnected. Cut a country off from the global financial system and you can cripple them without firing a single shot. And that's exactly what makes them the new weapon of choice. That's why countries choose sanctions over traditional military action, because it lowers political cost. Going to war requires public support, congressional approval, and carries massive political risk. Sanctions, you can implement them with an executive order. They're politically convenient because they look tough without the body bags. The public sees action being taken, but there's no immediate blowback from casualties or military failures. This is where the real power comes in. The United States controls the world's reserve currency, the dollar. Most international transactions flow through American banks, get cut off from the dollar system, and you're essentially excluded from global trade. But do sanctions actually work? The answer is complicated. Sanctions on Iran's nuclear program brought the country to the negotiating table in 2015. The Iranian economy shrank, inflation skyrocketed, and eventually they agreed to the nuclear deal. Success, right? Well, when the US pulled out of the deal in 2018 and reimposed sanctions, Iran didn't collapse. Instead, they started enriching uranium again, built closer ties with China and Russia, and found creative ways to evade sanctions. After invading Ukraine, Russia faced the most comprehensive sanctions in modern history. The ruble crashed initially, but then recovered. Energy exports to Asia increased. The economy contracted but didn't collapse. The pattern? Sanctions are really good at causing economic pain, but translating that pain into political change, that's much harder. Here's what makes sanctions complicated as weapons of war: the collateral damage. When you sanction a country, who really suffers? Usually, it's not the elites or the government officials, it's ordinary people who can't get medicine, food, or basic necessities. Sanctions can also backfire. They can rally populations around the leaders, creating a rally around the flag effect. they can push sanctioned countries into closer alliances with other sanctioned nations. And here's the big one: sanctions are eroding the dollar's dominance. Countries are actively seeking alternatives to avoid US financial control. We're seeing the rise of digital currencies, bilateral trade agreements bypassing the dollar, and alternative payment systems. The very weapon that makes sanctions so powerful might eventually undermine itself. The question is, what kind of world are we building when economic exclusion becomes the primary tool of international conflict? Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more.